Alright then, so what I'd like to do now is add in another input field below the role whereby a user can enter in their skills. For example, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Photoshop, hopefully Vue.js by now. And then for each of those skills, I'd like to take it and add it to an array, which we can then store in our component data down here. So we're keeping track of all the skills a user has. So in order to do this, we're going to have to learn about keyboard events, which include things like key up, key press, key down, and also keyboard event modifiers. Now these work in a very similar way to mouse event modifiers that we saw before. It's just that this is for keyboards. So now what I'm going to do is first of all create that input field above the terms but below the role. We need a label, and that label is going to say skills. And then below that I'm going to create an input field, and the type of input field is text. Now then, I'm also going to apply a vModel to this, and I'm going to call this temp skill. And the reason I'm going to call it temp skill is because every time a user adds in a new skill and then presses a certain key, I'm going to take that temp skill and add it to a skills array, and then we will clear the temp skill so a user can add in another one. So it's always just a temporary skill. Okay, so let's create that down here now. Temp skill, like so, and that's going to be just an empty string to begin with. Now I also, like I said, want to store all the skills inside an array. So first of all, how are we going to do this? Well, if we come over here and take a look at this, if I type in HTML, that's being stored in the temp skill property. Now what I'd like to do is listen for a keyboard event, and that is going to be a key up event. So that when a user presses a certain key, for example the comma, but it could be any other key that you want, I want to take what they've typed before the comma and I want to add it to the skills array. And at that point I then want to clear this field so they can add another skill like CSS. Then if they type comma again, I want to take the text again they've typed and add it to the skills array and then clear it. So I need to listen for that key up event or key press event, whichever you prefer, for the comma. And then when it is a comma, that's the signal that I need to take what a user types and put it into the skills array. So that's what we're going to do. So first of all, we need to listen for this event. Now there's many different types of keyboard events. So you could use over here, if we say at, because it is an event, and then we could use key press, or we could use key down, or we could use key up, which is what I'm going to use. And then this fires every time a user presses a key and then lifts it up. So I want to fire a function when this happens. So add skill is going to be the name of that function. Now we need to create that down here inside the methods property. So add skill. Now I also want to take in the event object into this function, which remember we get automatically whenever an event fires in Vue. So let's log that to the console to see what it looks like. And if I come over here now, whenever I press any key, when that key comes up, the event object is going to be logged over here. So I could press K and we see that event object and we can see the key was K. So I can also press comma and we can see the key is comma. Now that is the event that I want to listen for when the key is equal to a comma. So let's check that first of all down here, because remember, I only want to add that skill that a user types into the input field when a user presses comma. So I'm going to say if, first of all, and then I'll take the event e.key is triple equal to a comma when that is true, but also I want there to be a value inside temp skill. So if they just type in, for example, nothing but a comma, then I don't want this to fire because they've not typed anything before it. So let's say, and we have this .temp skill, meaning that has a value. If this was an empty string still, then this would be false, and then whatever code we place inside this if block would not fire. So this is only going to fire if we press comma and we have a value before the comma for the temp skill. All right. So then what I'd like to do now is I'd like to take whatever the temp skill is and add it to this skills array. So let me do that. I'm going to say this dot skills and then dot push and then this dot temp skill, like so. So now then, every time we press a comma, it's going to add whatever is in the input field to the skills array right here. Now, after that is done, I want to take this .temp skill, like so, and I want to set it equal to an empty string again, because then it will clear the input field, so we can add a new one. So now let's try outputting this, but instead of outputting it right here at the bottom, I'm going to cycle through them underneath this input field and output them right here. So to do that, I'm going to say div, and then I'm going to say v4, which we have seen already to cycle through something, and that is going to be equal to skill in skills. Skills is what we're cycling through. Now inside this, I'm going to output the skill. Before we do that though, notice we have an error, and if we hover over, it says we need a key on this thing, and that is so that Vue can keep track of the different elements in this list. So whenever we use v4, we should always have a key property, and that should be unique for each skill. So do we have anything inside the skills array which is unique? Well, the skill itself. So we can just bind by using a colon the skill, like so. And that is going to be unique for every skill as we cycle through them. They might add in the same skill twice, but we'll sort that out later on. For now, I'm also going to give this a class of pill, so we can style it a bit later on. And inside the div, I'm just going to output the skill. So I'll say skill like so. Remember, we have access to that individual skill as we cycle through them. So let's save this and preview over here. And if we type something in, I'm going to clear this. If we type in HTML and then press comma, notice this goes down here. We see the comma as well, which we will sort out shortly, but we see that. Now, if I type in CSS and press comma, that's added. Okay, so there's two problems. The first problem is that we see the comma over here. And the second problem is that I can add in duplicate values. So I could type in HTML and press comma, and that would now appear twice, and I don't want this to be the case because of two reasons. First of all, the key is not going to be the same for each div, and when we use Vue, it must be that the key is always unique. If you don't do this, then you might have unexpected behavior later on. So that must always be unique. The second reason that this is a problem is just that we don't want them to be twice. That makes no sense. We just want one skill to appear once in the list. So the way we're going to solve this problem is by first of all coming down to this if check right here, and inside that if check I want to make sure that the temp skill is not already inside the skills array. So let me do an if check here to do that. I'll say if, and then I'm going to say this dot skills dot includes, which is an array method, and then this dot temp skill. Okay, so let me just open this up and explain it. This right here will check to see if the skills array already includes the temp skill which we're trying to add to it. Now, if it does include that, this is going to be true. Now, I only want to fire this code if it doesn't include that. So I need to negate this. And now, if it doesn't include this, it's going to be true because of this. And therefore, we can add the temp skill. So let me take this and place it inside here. So now we can add duplicate skills. So if I save this and test it, let me come over here, HTML, press comma, and it adds it. CSS, that's fine. If I try to add in HTML again and press comma, we don't get it anymore. It still clears it because we still clear it right here outside of this if block, but it only adds it in if it's not already included in the skills array. So that's the first problem solved. The second problem is that this thing right here is being added to the skills array as well, and we don't want that. So the way we can get around this is to add an event modifier to this thing over here. So if I say .alt, it means that the Alt key must also be pressed. And if we hold down the Alt key as well as pressing another key, the value of that other key won't actually appear inside the input. Let me demo that. If I type in S, it appears there. If I type Alt S, we don't see that, but the keyboard event still happens. So if I refresh so we can clear this, I'm going to type in HTML and then I'm going to say Alt, comma. And notice it still fires the event, but we don't actually get the comma now. So that's why I used this alt event modifier right here. So I know there was quite a lot to take in that video, but hopefully now you understand the two main concepts that we've gone through here. First of all, we have a keyboard event, key up, that fires a function every time there is a key up event inside this input field. And then we fire this add skill function. Inside that, we take in the event object and we check the key. And if it was a comma, and if this .temp skill has a value, if the user's typed something into the input field, at that point, we check the current skills. If the current skills does not already include the temp skill, what they've typed in right here, at that point, if it doesn't include it, we add that skill to the skills array. And then we clear out the temp skill, so a user can add in another one. Now, we add on the alt event modifier right here, so that the comma doesn't actually get displayed inside the skills array. It still fires the event, and it still recognizes that it was the comma key that was pressed, but it doesn't display that because when we hold alt and a key, it doesn't show that key in the input, okay? So there we go. That is keyboard events, and that is keyboard event modifiers. And again, we probably will use these more as we go forward.